I don't even know where to begin. Writing this makes me furious, but I have to let it out. My daughter, let's call her Sarah, has been nothing but trouble for years. I don't know if it's how we raised her or if it's just her nature, but it feels like she was born to push every button I have. She's selfish, ungrateful, and takes no responsibility for anything. It wasn't always like this. When she was younger, she was sweet, maybe a little stubborn, but I figured that was just normal kid behavior. But then middle school came and everything changed. She started acting like the world owed her something, like she was somehow superior to everyone else. She'd throw tantrums if she didn't get her way, slam doors, scream at us, whatever she could do to make a scene. My wife, Karen, kept saying, "It's just a phase, she'll outgrow it." She didn't. By the time Sarah reached her teen years, it was as if she had made it her mission to make our lives miserable. She lied about everything, where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. If her lips were moving, she was probably lying. She skipped school so often that the principal called us in for a meeting. I told her she needed to turn things around, but she just rolled her eyes and said, "Whatever, Dad." By 16, she dropped out of high school completely. One day she came home and told us she wasn't going back. "School's stupid," she said. "I don't need it." Karen and I begged her to reconsider, but she wouldn't listen. She packed her bags, said she was leaving, and walked out the door without a second glance. She ran off with some boyfriend, a guy who was a complete loser, no job, no prospects. I don't even remember his name. For 3 years, we didn't hear a word from her. No calls, no texts, nothing. Karen was heartbroken. She cried herself to sleep so many nights wondering if Sarah was okay, if she'd ever come home. As for me, I was angry, but I also felt a sense of relief. The house was quiet without her, no drama, no fighting. I thought maybe this is for the best. Then one night she showed up on our doorstep. It was pouring rain, and there she was drenched to the bone, holding a trash bag filled with clothes. "I have nowhere else to go," she said. My first instinct was to slam the door in her face, but Karen rushed past me and pulled her inside before I could do anything. She hugged Sarah like she had just returned from a war zone, even though Sarah hadn't bothered to contact us. In 3 years, our daughter Karen kept saying, "We can't just leave her out there." I let her stay, but deep down, I knew it was a mistake, and man was I right. At first, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she'd changed. Maybe she'd learned something from her time away. Nope. Within days, she was back to her old ways. She didn't look for a job, didn't help around the house, didn't do anything but sit on the couch scrolling through her phone. We'd ask her to do something simple, take out the trash, do the dishes, anything, and she'd roll her eyes, like we were asking her to climb Mount Everest. "Why can't you do it?" she'd say. "I'm tired from what's sitting on her ass all day." And then there were the late nights she'd leave after dinner, saying she was going for a walk, but she'd be gone for hours. Sometimes she wouldn't come home until after midnight. When I asked where she'd been, she'd just shrug and say, "Nowhere," like it wasn't any. Of my business, she'd return with a smile, like everything was fine, then flop on the couch and start scrolling through her phone again. I tried to talk to my wife Karen about it, but she kept making excuses. "She's been through a lot," she'd say. "She just needs time to adjust." Adjust to what? Sitting around all day acting like the queen of the house while we bent over backward to accommodate her. One night I couldn't take it anymore. Sarah had been out until 1 a.m. And when she finally came home, I confronted her. "Where the hell have you been?" I asked. She just laughed and said, "Why do you care?" That's when I told her she needed to start pulling her weight or find somewhere else to live. Her response, "You're supposed to take care of me. That's what parents do." I couldn't believe it after everything she'd done. Dropping out of school, running away, ignoring us for 3 years, she still thought we owed her something. That was the moment David decided I'd had enough. I gave her an ultimatum. She had 24 hours to pack her things and leave. My wife Karen tried to argue, but I shut her down. "She's an adult," David said. "She made her choices. It's time for her to deal with the consequences." At first, Sarah didn't take me. "David, seriously?" She just laughed and said, "Yeah, okay, Dad," like it was some kind of joke. But when she realized David wasn't kidding, her attitude changed. She started yelling, "You're a terrible father!" She screamed, "You don't love me!" David stood my ground and gave her my words. She stormed off to her room, slamming the door so hard that the whole house shook. My wife. Karen gave me David the silent treatment for the rest of the day, but David didn't care. It happened before the 24 hours David gave Sarah to leave were even up. David was in the living room sitting on the couch and scrolling through the news on my phone, trying to decompress after another argument with my wife Karen about her enabling Sarah. David's patience was already worn thin, but David David just had to hold out until tomorrow night. Then Sarah would be gone for good, and David, could finally have my home back. But life has a funny way of kicking you when you're already down. There was a loud knock at the door. 3 quick sharp bangs that sent David's heart racing. It wasn't a friendly knock. David got up to answer it, David's stomach twisting into knots. When David opened the door, there were 3 police officers standing there, all of them looking dead serious. "Sir, we have a warrant to search your property," one of them said. David's mind went blank for a second. Why? "We received an anonymous tip about illegal drugs being stored in this house," the officer explained. "The report is filed under your name." David's name, David's house. David felt like the ground had just been pulled out from under me. David wanted to argue to slam the door in their faces, but David knew that wouldn't get me David anywhere. So David stepped aside and let them, and feeling a sense of dread settle over me, David, like a heavy blanket. They spread out quickly, one officer staying in the living room, while the others began searching the house. My wife Karen stood, frozen in the hallway, her face pale like she had seen a ghost. Sarah, on the other hand, sat on the couch completely unfazed. She even had the nerve to smirk at me. David, as the officers went upstairs to check the bedrooms. I knew without a doubt that this was her doing. Who else could it be? She'd been sneaking around, staying out late, hanging with God knows who. She was the only one who had anything to gain from all this chaos. The officer started with her room. I stood in the hallway helpless, watching them tear through her things, flipping through drawers, pulling the sheets off her bed, emptying out her backpack. But they didn't find anything, not a thing. A small flicker of hope sparked inside me, maybe. This was all just a misunderstanding. Maybe Sarah hadn't done anything after all. Then they moved on to my room. I didn't think they'd find anything there. Why would they? I wasn't involved in anything illegal, and I certainly didn't have drugs in my house. But then one of the officers pulled back to the mattress on my bed and stopped. "Here," he said, holding up a bag filled with what I immediately recognized as heroin. As the officer raised the first bag of heroin, I glanced at Sarah, hoping to see shock or confusion. Instead, she just smirked, her lips curling into a look that made my blood run cold. She didn't flinch, didn't deny anything. She sat there like it was all just a game to her. My blood boiled as I realized she wasn't just indifferent, she was proud of what she'd done. I could barely breathe. It felt like the walls were closing in around me. "That's not mine," I said automatically, my voice trembling, but the officers didn't care. They kept searching. By the time they were done, they'd found several more bags hidden under my bed and scattered around the room. "Sir, you're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance," one of them said as they slapped the cuffs on me. Karen burst into tears, but Sarah just sat there watching like it was some movie when they cuffed me and led me out the door. I looked back at her, praying to see even the slightest sign of guilt or remorse. Instead, she smiled. She actually smiled. The next few hours were a blur. They took me down to the station, fingerprinted me, and took my mugshot. I kept repeating over and over that the drugs weren't mine, that someone had set me up. But nobody listened. The evidence was right there in my house, under my bed. That was all they needed. They denied me bail, claiming the amount of heroin they found suggested I was involved in distribution. My lawyer fought it, but it didn't matter. I was stuck in jail waiting for the investigation to unfold. In the following weeks, they started looking into the case. They tested the drugs for fingerprints, checked for DNA, anything that could link them to me, but there was nothing. My fingerprints weren't on the bags, and there was no evidence connecting me to the drugs still. That didn't mean I was off the hook. The house was in my name, which meant the drugs were my responsibility. Unless I could prove otherwise, my lawyer argued that someone must have planted them there, but without concrete evidence, it was my word against theirs. David knew it was Sarah. David didn't know how she'd done it, but David knew it was her. Maybe she'd been storing the drugs in my David's room, without me. David noticing, or maybe she'd planted them there as a way to get back at me. David for kicking her out. Either way, she was the only one who could have done it. David spent 5 agonizing months in jail while the case dragged on. Not because the investigation was complicated or because there wasn't enough evidence to clear my David's name, but simply because the court schedule was backlogged, apparently just had to wait its turn, even when someone's life was being torn apart. The delay felt like an eternity. Every day in that cell was another day David sat with my David's thoughts, replaying everything over and over, the betrayal, the humiliation, the helplessness. It all circled in my David's head like a broken record. My David's body was locked up, but my David's mind never stopped pacing. David couldn't stop thinking about how my David's own daughter had done this to me. David wondered if she was laughing about it, going about her life, like nothing had happened while David was stuck in a place David didn't belong. My wife Karen visited me David a few times during those months, but even her presence felt like another weight on my David's chest. She wasn't there to offer support or reassurance, not really. Every time she came, it felt like she was probing, fishing for answers. David couldn't give her. David needed her to believe in me. David to fight for me. But instead she just seemed confused, unsure if she could trust the man she'd been married to for 20 years. Why would Sarah do something like this? She asked during one visit, her voice hesitant, like she couldn't even say the words out loud without doubting herself. David clenched my David's fist so tightly, my David's knuckles turned white. You know why? David said, trying to keep my David's voice calm, but failing. You've seen what she's like. You've seen her lie, manipulate, twist things to get what she wants. This isn't new. She shook her head, her face pale and drawn. But planning drugs getting you arrested, that's not just lying, I don't know, it's evil. Her voice cracked, and she looked down at her hands, wringing them, like they held the answers. She'd been on this path for years. David said bitterly. You just didn't want to see it. You kept making excuses for her. She's been through a lot every time she crossed the line. You let her get away with it, and now this is where we are. My David's words hit her like a slap, but David didn't care. David was too angry, too tired, too broken to soften the truth for her. If she had stood by me, David believed in me, David from the start. Maybe David could have handled this better, but instead she kept second-guessing me. David making me. David feel like David was the one on trial. Maybe you just didn't know what was happening, she said during another visit, her voice trembling. Maybe there's more to this. David stared at her, stunned by how little faith she had in me. David, do you even hear yourself? David snapped. You're my wife. You've known me, David, for 2 decades. Do you really think I'd get involved in drugs? Do you really think I'd risk everything for what, some heroin under my David's bed? She didn't answer. She just sat there looking at the floor like a scolded child, but her silence spoke volumes. She didn't believe me. David, not completely, she might have wanted to, but deep down she had doubts, and that doubt cut deeper than anything else. The worst part was realizing that Sarah had planned this. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't a spur of the moment. It was cold and calculated. She'd taken the time to hide the drugs in my room, knowing it would shift the blame onto me. She'd reported me anonymously, ensuring the police had a reason to show up with a warrant. She did everything she could to frame me, and it had worked, and yet, my own wife couldn't see it. My parents who visited once couldn't see it. Even some of my so-called friends started distancing themselves, whispering behind my back. The evidence might not have pointed directly to me, but being arrested for drugs was enough to make people doubt. And doubt, it's a powerful thing. It sticks to you like a stain that never comes out, while the court kept delaying my hearing. I had nothing to do but sit in that cell, simmering in my anger. I thought about all the times Sarah had lied to my face, all the chances I had given her that she didn't deserve. I thought about how she'd smirked when the police took me away, like she knew exactly what she was doing. I thought about Karen's tears, not because I was in jail, but because she didn't know if she could trust me anymore. By the time I finally got my day in court, I wasn't the same person who had walked into that jail 5 months earlier. I was harder, angrier, less willing to forgive. The system had failed me, my family had failed me, and all because of the selfish actions of one person, my own daughter. When the truth finally came to light, Sarah's texts, the witnesses who saw her sneaking around, the lack of fingerprints or DNA linking me to the drugs, it felt like the world suddenly remembered. I existed, the charges were dropped, but the damage was already done. 5 months of my life were gone. 5 months where I was treated like a criminal, doubted by the people I thought loved me. My name might have been cleared legally, but socially, emotionally, I knew I'd never be the same. I wasn't just angry at Sarah. I was angry at everyone who had doubted me, who had left me to rot in that cell, while they questioned whether I was the kind of man who would hide heroin under my bed. And in that anger, a seed of revenge began to grow. I didn't just want Sarah to face the consequences of her actions. I wanted her to know what it felt like To lose everything to have the world turn on her the way it had turned on me? I wanted her to pay. The first thing I did when I got home was sit in the living room, in silence. Karen stood by the door awkwardly, like she didn't know what to say. Maybe she thought I'd be thrilled to be back, or maybe she expected me to forgive everything and move on. But I couldn't even look at her without feeling a mix of betrayal and rage. "Why didn't you believe me?" I finally asked. Breaking the silence, my voice cracked a little, which only made me angrier. I wanted to sound strong, not broken. She didn't answer right away. She just stood there, twisting her hands. It was hard. "Okay, the drugs were found in your room. What was I supposed to think? You were supposed to know me?" I snapped. "You've known me for 20 years. You've seen what Sarah's like. But the second something bad happens, you turn on me." My voice was rising now, and I didn't care. You know, I didn't do it deep down. You knew. But instead of standing by me, you let me rot in jail. While you played mom to the person who actually did this. Tears welled up in her eyes. But David wasn't about to feel sorry for her. She wasn't the one who'd spent months in a cell treated like a criminal. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but it didn't mean anything to me. David? Sorry didn't give me David back, the months David lost. Sorry didn't erase the fact that she doubted me David when David needed her most. Over the next few days, David tried to piece my David's life back together. The investigation had finally turned up undeniable proof that Sarah was behind everything. The text messages on her phone showed that she'd been dealing drugs for months, so maybe longer. She'd been using our house as a stash spot, hiding the heroin under my David's bed, so that if anything went wrong, I'd take the fall. The texts were damning. They showed her coordinating with a dealer, talking about moving product, and even laughing about how Dad would never notice. David read every single one of them, my David's hands shaking with rage. How could my David's own daughter do this to me? David, what kind of person sets up their own father to save themselves? The police also found witnesses who came forward, saying they'd seen Sarah sneaking around late at night, meeting with sketchy people in parking lots and alleyways. One of her so-called friends admitted that Sarah had bragged about hiding drugs in my David's house because she thought it was the perfect cover. When the police finally issued a warrant for her arrest, David felt a mix of relief and bitterness. Relief that they were finally going after the real culprit, but bitterness that it had taken so long and that David had had to pay the price for her actions. Sarah was arrested a few days after David got home. They found her staying at some rundown apartment with a bunch of low-lives. When the police searched the place, they found more drugs along with scales, baggies, and cash. It was clear she wasn't just using, she was fully involved in the drug trade. David thought seeing her arrested would bring me David some kind of closure, but it didn't. If anything, it just made me, David, angrier. She didn't look scared or ashamed when they took her away. She looked annoyed, like this was just some inconvenience she'd have to deal with. My wife, Karen, was devastated when she heard about the arrest. "She's still our daughter," she kept saying over and over like a broken record. "She's made mistakes, but she's still our baby." David couldn't take it anymore. "Sheck, not my daughter," David snapped. "Not anymore. My daughter wouldn't do this to me." "David, my daughter wouldn't destroy her own family just to save her own skin." The legal process that followed was long, exhausting, and messy, much like everything else Sarah had left in her wake. She was charged with possession of drugs, intent to distribute, and perhaps most painfully for me, false accusations against her own father. That charge hit me like a gut punch every time I heard it spoken aloud in court. Knowing that she had deliberately orchestrated my arrest, gone out of her way to frame me, and watched me suffer, it made my blood boil. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The text between her and her dealer, the witness statements, even her carelessness when hiding drugs in her apartment, it all painted a damning picture. But as damning as it was, it didn't make things easier for me. Every court hearing, every delay, every smug look she gave when she was brought in for questioning, it all chipped away at whatever pieces of humanity I still clung to. As part of the investigation, Sarah was required to take a drug test. Unsurprisingly, it came back positive. Not just for heroin, but for several other substances, including cocaine and amphetamines. It was the final nail in the coffin, the daughter I had once rocked to sleep. The little girl I had taught to ride a bike wasn't just a liar and manipulator, she was an addict and a criminal. Seeing the results didn't shock me, but it hurt. It's one thing to know in your gut that your child is on a destructive path. It's another thing entirely to see it spelled out in black and white. Part of me wanted to pity her, to see her as the victim of her own choices. But that part was drowned out by anger. She hadn't just ruined her life, she'd tried to ruin mine. My lawyer told me I didn't have to attend every hearing, but I couldn't stay away. I needed to see her face. I needed her to know I wasn't going to let her get away with this without facing the damage she caused. At one point during the trial, her lawyer argued that Sarah's actions were a result of addiction, that she wasn't in her right mind when she reported me to the police. I couldn't stay silent about this. I knew this wasn't some desperate mistake driven by addiction. It wasn't about weakness or bad judgment. It was intentional. She had never cared about the family, only about herself. This wasn't about drugs. It was about revenge. She wanted to hurt me, put me in trouble for kicking her out. That much was clear, but I kept those thoughts to myself, knowing the truth was already laid bare for everyone to see. There was no need for me to speak. Her actions had already spoken louder than anything I could say. The trial dragged on for months, delayed repeatedly by procedural nonsense and Sarah's lawyer trying to reduce her charges. Meanwhile, I tried to rebuild the wreckage of my life. People in the neighborhood still whispered when I walked by, some unsure whether I was truly innocent. Despite the evidence, Karen seemed to exist in a constant state of denial. "She's sick," she kept repeating, like it was a mantra that would somehow make this all easier to bear. "She didn't mean it. She didn't mean it," I snapped one night after dinner. She knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't just using, she was dealing. She put my name on a police report. "How the hell do you not mean that we her parents no matter what?" Karen said, her voice trembling. "Not anymore," I said coldly, pushing back my chair and leaving the table. When the verdict finally came, it felt more like a formality than a victory. Sarah was found guilty on all charges: possession of narcotics, intent to distribute, and filing false accusations. The judge didn't hold back, however. Instead of prison, she was sentenced to serve 8 years in a long-term drug rehabilitation center. The judge believed that addressing her addiction was critical to ensuring she didn't repeat her actions. She showed little emotion as the sentence was read, only giving a slight shrug, as if to say, "It is what it is." David wanted to feel relief, but David didn't. The damage was already done. 8 years wouldn't erase the 5 months. David spent in a cell. It wouldn't fix the relationships that had been shattered or undo the stain on my David's reputation. If anything, her conviction felt like the closing chapter of a book that David wished I'd never started reading. After the trial, David got a restraining order against Sarah to make sure she could never come near me. David again, even when she eventually gets out. David don't want her anywhere near my David's life. She made her choices and David made mine for a while. David couldn't sleep. David kept waking up in the middle of the night, haunted by everything that had happened. My wife Karen, on the other hand, seemed stuck in the past. She started writing Sarah letters in prison, trying to keep some sort of relationship alive. At first, David didn't say anything, but eventually it became too much. "What are you hoping to accomplish?" David asked her one night when David caught her sealing another envelope. "Sheik, our daughter." She said again that same broken mantra that had driven me David up the wall for months. "She stopped being our daughter the day she put me David in cuffs," David replied, David's voice cold and sharp. "I don't care what she's going through. I don't care if she gets better. She's out of my David's life, and that's not changing." That conversation was the tipping point. We were no longer on the same page, no longer even in the same book. My wife Karen clung to the idea of Sarah as the daughter. We used to know the little girl. She'd raised the baby she once held, but that version of Sarah didn't exist anymore. Not to me, David, and maybe not to anyone. It became clear that our marriage wasn't going to survive this. The trust between us was gone, eroded by months of doubt, anger, and pain. My wife Karen had doubted me, David, when David needed her most, and now she was trying to hold on to a relationship with the person who had destroyed everything we'd built. How could we come back from that? The answer was simple: we couldn't. One night, after another tense argument about Sarah, David finally said it out loud. "I don't think we can keep doing this." My wife Karen looked at me. "David," her eyes filled with tears. Karen saying, "You want to leave?" "I'm saying this isn't working," David said. David's voice steady but heavy. "We, not the same people we were before all of this. I don't trust you, and you don't understand me, David, anymore. And honestly, David don't think David can stay in this house surrounded by everything that reminds me, David, of her." She nodded slowly, wiping her tears. "I don't want this, but I understand." We agreed to separate a few weeks later. She kept the house, the one place David didn't want to be anymore. David moved into a small apartment across town. Far enough to feel like David was starting fresh, but close enough to handle the practicalities of dividing our lives. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The worst part wasn't the physical separation, it was the realization that the life we'd built together had crumbled so completely. We'd spent 2 decades as partners raising a family, building a home only for it to fall apart in the wake of our daughter's actions. Sarah's choices hadn't just destroyed my David's trust in her, they destroyed my David's marriage. The worst part of all, this wasn't the jail time or the trial, it was the realization that the life David thought David had was never as strong as David believed. My David's marriage had been hanging by a thread, and David hadn't even realized it until it was too late. Maybe someday I'll find a way to let go of all this anger, but not today. David just focus on putting one foot in front of the other and keeping Sarah as far away from me, David, as possible. She made her choices, and she'll live with the consequences, but so will David.